Well, that was my son, Mr. Morris.
Woo!
I'm Delia Parker-Mims, and I am the Democratic candidate running for Denton County Commissioner in District 3. But we're here today to talk about Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my truth. Can y'all take a few minutes to hear my truth?
Yes.
So that was my son. You don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you guys would have found him threatening? So what I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to talk about the first time I was told my son was threatening. Then I'm going to talk about how I feel threatened. And then we're going to talk about what we can do to call to action, right? Because protesting without action leads us back to silence, right? So let me talk to you for a minute. So when my son was in middle school, I'm getting dressed to go to work, probably late. So I get a phone call, and the lady says, "Mrs. Mims, I'm Morris's teacher. And yesterday when I was going to my car, Morris was walking through with his friends, and he saw me and he said, 'Is that your car?' And I said, 'Yes.' And then he said, 'Good to know.' So now I feel threatened." So, of course, that caught my attention, right? So no matter what time it was, I put my curly iron down and I said, "Okay, well, let's talk this out." She said, "Well, earlier that day, we were in a discussion and I didn't have a lot of time, and you know how Morris likes to just take discussions and go with it. So he kept raising his hand. But I never called on him because I really didn't have time to have that type of discussion." So Morris got discouraged, and he made a big sigh about his discouragement, because throughout the whole class he would raise his hand and I didn't call on him. And I think that was disrespectful. So I asked him to go in the hallway and write an apology letter, because that's what we do. We teach them how to write formal letters. And he wrote his letter, but I didn't think it was very apologetic. And I'm not making any of this up. It sounds like a movie, but I'm not. And so now I feel threatened and disrespected. So I said, I'll give you the clean version. No, not really. It was all clean. I said, "Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you first said that Morris raised his hand. So he complied with your classroom etiquette, right? Correct me when I'm wrong. And you were having a discussion that he wanted to participate in. But you said that you didn't have time to let him participate, so you excluded him from the discussion." To which he was disappointed because he wanted to participate. Have I got it correct so far? And then you found that his disappointment was disrespectful, so you decided to punish him. So now you feel threatened by a child who has never acted aggressive or threatening either to you or your property. Needless to say, that didn't work out well for her. But what's important to note is that Morris did not follow the code of the unspoken narrative. And that's what I call the code of white supremacy. He wasn't respectful. He wasn't remorseful enough. He had the audacity to be confident. And she was able to summarize that unspoken narrative that I call white supremacy with that one word: threatened. White supremacy, I'm not talking about racism. I'm talking about the belief that one group is superior to another based on their race. And I believe that we're seeing large crowds at these places because people in the suburbs that are largely white are beginning to realize that the silence in letting that unspoken narrative go perpetuates violence against people of color. And I believe that's why we are all here today, and I am encouraged to see the diverseness of our group. But we're here today because we know that that silence that is perpetuating that unspoken narrative that I call is dangerous. So let me tell you how I feel threatened. I'm going to fast forward it to 2020. I'm an attorney, and I work in many of the different counties around the area. So when I drive to a county and they are flying their symbols of oppression, and their symbols of racism, their symbols that would have had me enslaved, I am terrified. I am terrified. And then I am thrown in that false narrative, that false unspoken narrative, where I begin to think lesser of myself. I begin to get fearful, and I am immediately disarmed of all of my confidence. And the primary thing in my mind is, I better get the hell out of here before the sun goes down, right? That is my reality. When I see those signs, those symbols, those Confederate flags flying on the courthouses, flying on the lawns and the halls of justice, that is how I feel. I am terrified, and I feel like my client is probably not going to get justice, maybe because of me. So I do what I got to do, and I tear out of there as fast as I can. We are all here today because the unspoken narrative can no longer go unspoken. And we know that if we do not have a call to action, then in a week or so, the silence will come back. Mm-hmm. And that is unacceptable. So, before I tell you what I believe the call to action is, let me run one other thing by you. Our county, in Denton County, we fly our flags of oppression. Our government has its symbols of slavery, its symbols that would have had me enslaved on the lawn of our county government. So when I walk into the county government, I've got to walk through the statue and the symbol of my oppressors. Now, for the past several years, people have gone to the Commissioner's Court and asked that they remove those symbols. Remove that symbol. Put it in a museum. That's what you want to do. And they've been told, stop looking at the past. God will heal our land. Look towards the future. Slavery was 100 years ago. So I ask you this. How do you expect black people to stop looking at slavery, at the past, if our own county government is fighting so hard to maintain those symbols of oppression? You're going to tell me to stop thinking about the past, but I've got to walk through your symbol of oppression every day on the lawns of our government. So when we go to seek justice in our courthouse, we have to walk through that symbol of oppression. So what can you do? I believe everybody's here today because they know that the unspoken narrative, not racism, everybody's not a racist, but when the unspoken narrative of white supremacy that we just let go and go and go, I think people are here because they know that it's got to stop. And we've got to have a call to action. So I'm going to tell you, what can you do? You can elect people who could bring a different perspective to the table. Democracy works best when we all have a seat. That is not currently what we have. We all don't have a seat. What can you do? You can stop electing people who refuse to acknowledge that white supremacy exists, that sign is a sign of oppression, and that it needs to go. What can you do? You can provide resources and support for the people who are trying to get elected, because here's the bottom line. Change is made at the ballot, okay? I'm not here preaching a partisanship speech, but the reality is change is made at the ballot. So what you can do is make sure that we have the ability to have change at the ballot. Now, I'm going to throw something in. Before we got here today, somebody said, oh, I hope she's not being a partisan person because they saw my name on the list. So I just want to make something perfectly clear. You ever see my name on the list as a speaker, you can rest assured that you can never tell me what to say.
Ever.
Period.
Ever.
Yeah.
So what can you do? You can elect people who have the courage to stand up and fight. And what can you do? You can stand with me right here in solidarity, and you can say to the whole world, that statue must come down. 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 I'm Delia Parker-Mims. I am a candidate for Denton County Commissioner District 3, and I need your support. Thank you.